well, here, like, this is what worked for me. Maybe this will, and basically what I'm telling them is, I know that you're suffering, but for my sake, you just hurry up and get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really good.
Yeah, I've
It's
seen.
actually really bad.
It's a really good observation, is what
Yeah.
I'm saying. So if we recognize that advice giving is bad, and as we share those answers, hopefully listeners can see, okay, I see why that's an issue in group, but why do we still tend to do that? I think it's in our nature often to give advice. So even if we know it's unhealthy, why do we still tend to do that?
I'll give you two reasons why I do it. The first is I tend to be uncomfortable with the silence. That when someone is sharing or posing a question that maybe even is rhetorical, but is really just them trying to process out loud, the silence kicks in. And it's like,
wait a minute, no one's
like,
talking.
This is bad. This is bad. Assuming that silence is bad, and it's not. Like silence, really, there's a soberness to it in that moment. And so I think sometimes I just want to hurry out of the silence and get into something. And then also the other reason is, and this is my own conviction on why we struggle specifically as believers helping people with their process or with their problems or their struggles, is we're actually really uncomfortable with other people's suffering. And so when we give advice, what we're doing is we're actually trying to counteract that. Basically saying, if you could hurry up and just get over it, then I could feel more comfortable and less uncomfortable that you're struggling.
Yeah.
And so it's actually our unwillingness to sit in with that person, what's going on in their life or in their process or struggle. It's my unwillingness to do that pushes me to be like, well, here, like, this is what worked for me. Maybe this will, and basically what I'm telling them is, I know that you're suffering, but for my sake, will you just hurry up and get over it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really good.
Yeah, I've seen.
It's actually really bad.
It's a really good observation. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I've seen that too, and I think what happens is for the guy who is in that awkward place of like the silence or whatever. So when guys are sharing, then the advice giver sometimes will use that as an opportunity to take the spotlight off of him, so he doesn't necessarily have to go as deep in his answer.
Wow.
Because he may answer, or I may give you advice on the same question that I'm about to answer.
Right.
But because
It's a deflection.
Yeah. So now I'm just going to say, I'm not going to read my answer. I'm going to kind of rabbit trail the answer a little bit, because you kind of struck a chord and it's like, yeah, no, I think you should do it this way. Kind of like you said, it's like, this is how I did it. But
Interesting.
yeah, it's just a way of, deflection's a good word. It takes the spotlight off. And last thing guys want to do is, one, take advice from anybody.
Right.
So and I think the fear behind that is, and I was going to say that in the last question, is what happens is even if a guy's doing good and we share some advice that's really good sound advice, for those of us in sports or whatever, growing up in sports, it's like you can have a great game and score 25 points, and then you have a coach or a parent or somebody say, well, you could have, you had a chance, you could have scored another 10 points if you would have done it this way.
Yeah. Right.
So what I'm doing is not good enough.
Right. You're
Don't
diminishing.
you
You're
need to
diminishing what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
I just think I was trying to score that many points.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, just to make sure people understand, it's not just guys who are struggling or women who are struggling. It's also in the betrayal groups.
Yep.
This could be an issue that anybody struggles with in group.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we struggle with, particularly in addiction and addiction of any kind, is thinking or believing that we're healthier than we really are. In fact, that's part of why a lot of us have ended up in an addiction, because we thought we could handle something when we couldn't. We thought we were okay with a smartphone, or that we could be in hotel rooms by ourselves, or whatever situation we put ourselves in. We kind of had this self-delusion of, I'm healthy enough, I'm strong enough, I'll make the right decisions, and then we didn't and ended up in a bad place. And so in group, when we're giving advice, sometimes it's out of that place where we like to be the expert, or we like to think we've got it together. We like to feel like we have answers, but really we're not as far along as we think we are. And so we're kind of giving advice because we feel good or feel like we have the answer, when really it'd be better for us to keep listening and be humble and say, well, I'm not real sure. What have you learned? And that the other thing that comes to mind why we tend to give advice, I think we have a hard time trusting the process, especially if we're a few months into recovery. And this is especially maybe on the betrayal side, but also the addiction side, where we have seen some growth and we have seen some change. there will be things that are early on in other people's stories that seem obvious to us. It's like, well, don't do that, or just do this. And we maybe forget that when we first learned it, it wasn't that easy. When we first encountered it, we had to struggle, we had to wrestle, we had to arrive at a conclusion ourselves. And so if we just become the advice giver and say, oh, it's easy, just do this, we're almost robbing someone of the experience they can have by learning it themselves, by going through a process of discovering, and that's in the group guidelines as well, about that, letting people discover their own answers, letting them figure out what works. And I do think the group is there to create, a safe place, to create some guidance. And so we don't want, by doing this episode, to make people fearful of saying anything. Right. I mean, I do think there are ways, and we're going to get to it, that in a helpful way we can bring up ideas, we can get the group to be kind of aware of something and talk about it, but a lot of it's just our posture of thinking, I'm the expert, I can fix you, here's the way to do it, versus that humility of, here's something that's worked for me, and just staying in that place of trusting the process, and that everyone arrives at answers at their own pace, and that's okay.